you do a class like this with adults and everybody has different backgrounds and abilities and knowledge already there, you kind of vacillate between insulting people and overwhelming people. So please, if I'm either one of those, tell me. I can always get more complicated. I can't really get easier because I'm making it really easy. But I can always get more complicated if you're insulted. I can be more complicated. If you're overwhelmed, I can go slower. Okay? So my goal in this, it's very common in choirs, not just church choirs, school choirs too, for vocalists to not know theory very well, and to not know reading, what we call reading very well, where they know all the notes and know all the rhythms. The main part of that, the main reason for that is the choir is the only ensemble where all of your parts are on your page. Like you can be singing bass, but you can see what the soprano's doing. If you play instrumental music, all you have is your music, so you have to count everything yourself. So it's very easy to just kind of follow what you hear in choir, and so that kind of people just do that and they don't really read that well, and that's just really normal. We get that a lot. We get vocal majors that come in and they've never really had to read very well, and we have to kind of like get them because it's different than band. So choir people can, what usually happens is choir people can hear and sing really well, and then the band people can read really well, and then they make fun of each other for the one that they're not good at. That's what we usually do. We make fun of them in theory, and they make fun of us in sight singing. So it kind of works out. We just all make fun of each other. So I think my goal in this would be for you to understand enough that you can practice your parts at home without having to have to listen to it, to just be able to see it, and what we call it sight singing it, where you can see it and you know that this interval sounds like this, so I can practice singing this up. That'll be kind of my goal. So I'll just start with what the notes are on the staff. The two main, really, unless you sing medieval motets, the only two clefs you're ever going to see are bass and treble. So I'll just kind of go through. The good thing about it is music always follows the same pattern. It's a pattern we know really well. It's just the alphabet. It's the alphabet up, it's the alphabet down. So like if you knew only one note on both clefs, you could figure out all the others really easily. So what we usually do with the treble clef is called the G clef. And that's because this little loopy thing right here goes right on G. So if you realize that this is G, and you see this note, you can go G, A, B, C, D, you know it's a D. So if you could just learn one note, then you can always figure out the others, and then eventually you can just sight see them and know them instantly. The same thing would happen going backwards. Let's say we have one down here, you would go G, F, E, that's the E. Easy breezy? Okay, same thing on bass. So the bass is called the F clef. This right here is F. And so you would do the same thing, you just go up. Let's say you're going to here, you go F, G, A, there's the A. If you wanted to go down here, F, E, B, C, B, A, there's the A right there. Easy breezy? Okay, yeah, I know, I'm insulting, I'm sorry. Okay, good. And then once we get beyond that, you get into what's called ledger lines, which you won't see a ton of in choir. We mostly sing in the ledgers. Altos may go below, basses may go below. Tenor probably does the most going above. So let's say we've got this here and this here. So I know my F really well. We'll go up to A. This space right here will be B, and then this is just another line. You got to tell me this line goes all the way across. C, and then this would be D, and then this would be E. You got to tell me the line goes across. So we just use the ledger lines to keep going up without having to make a gigantic staff. Does that make sense? Good. Okay. Now, this may be superfluous, but it's kind of cool. Something we call register numbers. So we number the notes based on octave with the register numbers. And so sometimes you'll be talking about blah, 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 blah. Here's the C4, blah, 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 and here's the A6. So this is the easy way to find this. So right here, one line below the treble, one line above the bass is the same note. It's called middle C. Why is it called middle C? Because it's in the middle. And it's about in the middle of the keyboard too. Middle C is C4. And the way that we know what the other ones are is every note between this C And this C is going, well, not the C, it'll be the B. And the B that's right below the next C is a 4. All this is 4. It's E4, G4, A4, all these are 4. Anything below it, which actually I'll use space left in the C's below it, that's down here. This is going to be 3. So anything in here between this B and this C is going to be the register 3. So these are really helpful when you're talking about, let's say your basses are singing, pretend like this will be song because I can't sing this slow, but if your bass is singing this C and your sopranos are singing this C, this is C2, this is C4, that was how when we talked about the difference. Even though they're both singing C, they're singing very different Cs. Do you guys know how we come up with octaves? You want to geek out for a minute? Okay. So all music, all sound is made by vibration. So the way that we register notes is by how many times something vibrates in a second. So like, what everyone tunes to is A440, there's 440 vibrations in it. So every time you double that is an octave. So we measure it by vibration of the number of times it oscillates in a second. So that's how we came up with the octaves and the different types of temperaments that we have, and different types of systems that we've used through history. The one that we have now is called tempered pitch, which is where we try to get the numbers to be as equal as possible, which means that, like piano's in tempered pitch. If you played a chord, chords are usually 1, 3, 5, so we go C, E, G. The fifth is just a little off, and the third is even more off from being the perfect. Let me think how to explain it. Okay, and really in the weeds, I'll just do it quick. Okay, so here's a sound wave, and here's another sound wave. When things are in tune, it's because the two sound waves move in such a way that they connect together. So like the hump is lining up with the other hump and they're together. When things are out of tune, it's when the two humps are hitting each other. That's why when something's really out of tune, you kind of hear the that's the vibration of the two sounds hitting each other. So this is what we always try to achieve in music. And when we use tempered pitch, it's not perfect, but it's close. And the reason I say that is when you are, let's say you're trying to build a chord with the three of you singing a different note, you're singing 1, 3, 5, you can't go completely off what the piano does. You have to then micro-tune it with your ear. And that's why people like to use voice, because voice and any string instrument, and if you're in band or trombone, those are the three things that can micro-tune everything that can tune just a little bit off. Whereas every other instrument, you have to change your face somehow or change something to be just a little off to get it to all click together. And that was really in the weeds. Thank you for amusing me with that. Now we know our letters really well. What's going to change what these notes mean from a half step, whole step, left over steps yet? You guys know half step, whole step? Okay, good. We're going to talk about steps then. What's going to change from a half step, whole step is the key signature. So the key signature, let's say we're in the key of G, which is 1 sharp. If you're singing a piece of music and you see the key at the beginning, that's telling you that every F sharp, every F you see for the whole piece until they change this is going to be sharp. So if you're practicing at home and you have, let's say, you have a D followed by an F, you're going to know that you need to play F sharp there. And when we do that on the keyboard, we go back to the keyboard. So if you wanted to practice at home and you don't have the piano, you can use like a little Casio keyboard or anything that's even just an octave you can use. Or if you don't have anything like that, you can download pianos and a key on your phone that you can hit, and you can hit the notes. So usually a piano, the easiest way, we'll do the same thing we did, we'll just climb by the letters. If you look at the buck teeth, I always call them the buck teeth, the 2 black keys here. Right to the left of the buck teeth is C. And every white key is just a letter. C, E, E, F, G, A, B, C. Every white key is a letter. The black keys are what we use for accidentals, but every white key is a letter. So if something is F sharp, all that means is that we're going to go up 1 to the black key, and this is where we play F sharp. That's a really terrible key. So if we had let's say we were trying to figure out a D to F sharp and we're trying to sing the major third, then we would play the D and then we'd play the F sharp on our phone pianos or home pianos or whatever we're going to use. So we're going to go off the key based on that. It's easy to memorize the keys. We usually use this chart for it. If you can memorize which key has how many and then what the order is, let's say, you guys sing mostly in flats or sharps? You probably sing mostly in sharps, don't you?
It's both.
Do you sing mostly in sharps or flats?
Flats.
Oh, flats? Oh, okay. Usually, if you play anything that has strings in it, you're going to be singing in sharps. String players love sharps, and so most orchestral music is written in sharps. But let's do flats. So, like, if there's two flats, then I know I'm in the key of B flat, and I know my two flats are B and E because they always go in the same order. So no matter how many flats there are, if there's one flat, it's always going to be B. If there's two, it's always going to be BE because they always go in the same order. And usually I remember this by bead and then GCF. If you like math, we do greatest common factor. What's even better is Guckafuck. So we'll say bead Guckafuck. Memorize the flats. It's pretty easy that way. And then the sharps. The sharps do not spell anything fun, so I usually have my students make up phrases to figure it out. Mine is fat cats go down and barbecue, because that's what I was taught in high school. But you can make up anything you want there. Or this works better for some people. They can memorize the flats really easily. The sharps is just the flats backwards. Music always intersects. Music is very much like that. It always intersects, and everything, things work backwards that work forwards. So yeah, this is just the flats backwards. As far as your numbers, I didn't have a cool trick for that. This does have beat in it, but not until you get to the B flat and the 3. So C has nothing. And then another trick for learning how many each one has is every letter is going to have a sharp and a flat key that goes with it, and it always adds to 7. So like B flat has 2 flats, so B has 5 sharps. A flat has 4 flats, so A has, so A has 3 sharps. It always adds to 7. So if you see a key of 3 sharps and you're not really sure what it is, try to think of which one has 4 flats, and you can figure out what the letter is. Does that make sense?
So 7 being the perfect number.
7 being the perfect number.
That's cool.
There's a lot of 7s in music. A lot of 7s and 3s. Any questions so far? Let's talk about intervals. The reason that we learn intervals, well, there's a couple of reasons we learn intervals. From a singing standpoint, the reason we learn intervals is because we can tie each interval to a song that we already know. And this is what we teach in sight singing. The easiest way to find the interval is just to count the letters. So let's say F to A. Not even count the letters, just count the spaces and lines. So we have 1, 2, 3, that's a third. A to F here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that's a sixth. So the reason that we do that, to know what the interval is we teach them songs in their head to realize, like, let me get a couple. If you have, most music is built on perfect fourths and perfect fifths. So if you had a perfect fourth, anybody think of a song that starts that way?
Here comes the
Here
bride.
comes the bride, yeah, that's what we always teach. Yep. Another one is Amazing Grace. I'm sorry. That's perfect fourth. Perfect fifth. Can you think of a song with that one? Alright, the one we usually use is Star Wars, actually. There we go. That is the extent of my piano ability. So, we use those. So let's say you're singing along, and like if we sing in church, I always use the hymnal, and I see this lead coming up, I start to think ahead, which song is that, so that I can do the leap right. So if you're sight singing in choir and you don't need the piano, you can just hear, so you're singing a C, and you see a G coming up, you know that that's a fifth. You would say, oh, Star Wars, dun, Jesus, everything's Jesus. So that's why we teach the intervals. That's one of the reasons that we teach the intervals. That's, to me, probably the most applicable reason for intervals in choir. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Good. Okay. Any questions about notes or staffs, or do you want to learn more of the songs we use for intervals?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Hang on. I'll give you like little crash course. Minor 2, which is the closest two intervals. When you go from F to F sharp or G to G flat, you're only moving one half step. Be down here. Yeah, Jaws. I always use Jaws. Major second, which is the next larger interval. Right up here. Usually we use happy birthday for that. Happy birthday. That's the major 2. That's pretty common because that's going up the scale of the major scale. So that's pretty common in the major 2. If you have kids, you might know this one. Lullaby. Greensleeves is also a major minor. That's also usually the one that I use. Major 3. The next one up. You can do When the Saints Come Marching In. Now, I usually use Holy, Holy, Holy. So like, all it does is outline the chord. Holy, Holy, Holy. That can definitely hit the 3 and the 5. Perfect 4th was Here Comes the Bride. Your 5th is Star Wars. We can do major 6. So major 6 has 2 that we know really well. There's this. My Bonnie Lies Over the Oceans, we'll use that. So you can do either NBC, or, since we're in Alabama, oh crap, I got the rest of it though.
You better learn that.
Right behind Holy, Holy, Holy.
That's right.
There we go. There we go. Does anybody see West Side Story?
Yes.
Yeah, you should all see West Side Story before you die. This is a minor 7th is There's a Place for Us. There's a place for us. That's always the one I use for that. Not a lot of songs you can use for a minor 7. A major 7 you can hear because it rubs. When I say it rubs, like it doesn't sound very good together. So usually I teach my students, if you hear a really wide interval and it rubs really bad, that's usually a major 7 by each other. Because you want to hear it resolve. So you can always tell the major 7. One more I teach, even though you very rarely see this in choir music, it's called the tritone. This is just really geeking out, but it's really cool that our 2 most beautiful intervals, the perfect 5th and the perfect 4th, are right next to each other. So here's 4th, and then here's 5th. Right in between those is our ugliest interval, the tritone. They used to call it the chord of the devil. It's the chord of Diablo. And in medieval times, it was illegal to write it in music because it was the chord of the devil. Yeah, usually where we teach it is The Simpsons. And also from West Side Story, it's Maria. Maria, I just met a girl named Maria. So that's the tritone. Last one, octave. Pretty easy here because it's the same. If you want a song for it, similar to Rainbow. That's what we usually use to teach them. But it's really easy to hear when you put them together because the 2 pitches envelop each other really well. Why is it important to know what key you're in? Anybody?
So you're accidental, so you'll know where you're accidental.
So you know where accidentals are? That's one. Anything else?
No, if it's gonna get too high to sing.
So you'll know what chord you're singing and what your place is in the chord. So I guess you guys have any choir music like on you?
Yes. But new music,
Yeah, anything will work.
Yeah, what we sang last week.
Okay.
It's a hymn.
Winner is this.
Here's some hope.
And we know what ages can go wrong with one.
you might be.
Galaxy far, far away.
Which is pretty much anything you're going to sing in choir. It's built-in triads. This little chart here is called the white note triads. These are all the white notes on a piano. So what I usually do is have students, in theory one, when they come in as freshmen, we do this chant every morning. We chant them together. C, E, G, D, F sharp A, E, G sharp E, F, A, C, G, B, D, A, C sharp E, B, D sharp, F sharp. So we memorize all of our triads, because if you can memorize all the white key triads, then you know every single triad there is. These are all the major triads. So the reason that you would know every triad there is because if, let's say we're in G flat, if you lower the G flat, then all you have to do is lower the other two, and now you have a G flat major chord. So you always, if you can learn your white note triads, then you'll know every single triad that there is, and you'll recognize them when you see them in music. So let's say channels only. My very first note, I'm in the key of 4 flats, which is what? A flat. So I'm in A flat. I've got A flat C, I've got E, and then the second beat, the second eighth note, I've got another A flat. So based on this, what chord am I making? Huh? The A flat?
Yeah, right before we said what chord or what key.
Yes.
Yes.
We're in A flat, and we're actually making the A flat chord. And most, especially hymns, will always do this. They'll always start and end with whatever key you're in. A lot of times they'll end with the 5 of the key and then the 1. The biggest exception to that is the Amen we do on the doxology. It's a 4 to 1. It's called a plagal cadence. It's built on 4 instead of 5. Anything built on 5 is called an authentic cadence. So we're usually going to, and let's see if this is 5 1. So I got E, D, E, and G. So that is actually a 5/7. It's got the 7 of the chord. So 5/7 1 is pretty common too. So every hour at the very end, I've got the E7 chord that then goes up to the 1, which is the A flat C, E flat, A flat. So, and that would be a perfect authentic because the A flat is in the soprano. I get into the weeds. Yes. So the reason that we want to know the key is because when I was talking about before how in tempered pitch we don't play perfectly in tune. If you are the third of the chord, if you're the middle of these, then you're supposed to lower your pitch about 15 cents to click into the chord. If you're the fifth, if you're the last one, you're supposed to raise your pitch about 5 cents to click into the chord. Now I can tell you that it doesn't really matter because those things don't really make sense in our brain, but you just do it naturally to make the two sounds click together. So that's the reason that we want to know all of our chordal structures and we want to know our key structures so that we can look at our note. If I know that I'm singing an A flat and I see that I'm hanging on a C for a while, I'm going to figure, and I could be wrong because it could change by the bass note, but I'm going to figure that I am the third of the chord, especially if it's the end of the beginning, and I'm going to lower my third just a little bit to fit in the wrong chord structure. Yeah?
I had to ask you a question. This has bothered me for a long time. I didn't know why. If you tune a guitar and you turn it dead on, that third doesn't sound quite right when you're playing the chord.
That's right.
So if you tune the chord in, then that string is actually out a little bit.
Yeah, we would consider it out of tune just based on the 440 scale, but it would be in tune based on the
So I've
chord
always
scale.
heard the third not sounding quite right on the guitar, and I didn't know why.
That's why.
That's cool.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
So when you were saying accent,
Mhm.
I don't know that term, can you spell it and explain? Is that something on the trombone or just pitch related?
That's pitch related. Cents is spelled just like money cents. When we measured, like 440 is A440, if you went down to 435, you went down 5 cents. So that's the way they describe it when you're moving. Every pitch has its own number.
It's so slight, everything's so slight.
Very slight, yes. That's why it's almost better to not explain it, because when people try to do it mentally, it doesn't work. But if you just say, hey, move around till it sounds right, and they're like, oh, it sounds good, and you're just like, yeah, look at you. So that's what we usually do. But it's kind of cool to learn the science behind it as to why it works that way. It's pluses and minuses of tempered pitch. Incidentally, that is why in medieval Renaissance times, strings were mostly used with choir, because they could micro-tune everything just like the vocalist did. That's why organ can be kind of difficult. Organ is set. Piano and organ are set. And so if you sing with one, it makes it more difficult to micro-tune all the chords because you want to go with what you hear. So that's why usually a cappella is better, but it's also a lot harder, so. So yeah, that's why if you tune, and that's why like if I go up to the piano and I play CEG, it bothers me because I can hear I'm like that is not in tune, but it's close enough in tune that no one can, most people can't tell the difference. You can only tell the difference if you're super anal about pitch. So yeah, tempered versus non-tempered, what we call chordal. I usually call it chordal tuning instead of tempered tuning. Yes. What was I talking about?
We're in the weeds with you, so.
I'm sorry, yeah, we're all in the weeds together. I'll get the weed whacker out. I was gonna, any questions about this before I go on to duration? Okay, duration's pretty simple. We usually do it kind of like a tree. We'll do time signatures first. Does anybody know how to read the time signatures?
Virginia, do you know how to read?
A lot of times not.
I'm guessing.
It's actually pretty simple. The note on top tells you how many beats are in a measure. The note on the bottom tells you what kind of note gets the beat. So 4/4 is 4 quarter notes. There's 4 quarter notes in a measure. There's 4 beats in a measure, and they're measured by quarter notes. 3/4 is 3 quarter notes. 2/4 is 2 quarter notes. So those are pretty simple. Those are what we call the duples. The duple, that means that it can be divided by 2. 6/8 is a little more complicated. There's 6 eighth notes in a measure. So usually we group them like this. So you could argue that 6/8 can be a duple because if 6/8 goes by fast, we usually don't count them in 6, we count them in big 2s that have 3 notes in them. So that 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But technically, 8th note gets the beat, and 8th note divides into 2 16ths. That's really fast, isn't it? So technically, it is duple, even though 3 notes get the beat in what we usually do, which is the dotted quarter note. That's probably what it means. But that's how we read the time signatures. It's really pretty simple. How many beats are in a measure? What kind of note gets the beat? Mostly in choir, you're going to see these 4. You may occasionally get 9/8, which is essentially just 6/8, but with 3 more 8 notes. So if we're doing the big beats, we just do 1 more big beat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's also 12/8, which is the same thing again. We're just adding 3 more notes. Usually, if you're going to pattern that, you just pattern a 4 to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1. But all we're doing is just the same thing. We're just adding on to it. Sometimes, I'll do one. Sometimes you'll do 3/8. I've seen 3/8 before. All we do with 3/8 is there's 3 8 notes, and each 8 note gets a beat, and so you beat it like a 3/4, but the 8 note gets the beat instead of a quarter. You'll stick those in when we need like a fast 3, like if you're you stick like a little triple inside the duple. That's how we usually do that way. That's a really long solution. Does that make sense? Okay, so note tree. Everybody knows how many beats is in a whole note, correct? How many? 4. And then from there, we just map it down. All we do is divide. So we do half notes, which are 2. Then we do quarter notes, which are 1 beat. And then we do 8 notes, we can connect them, which are half a beat. Then we do 16th notes, which are a quarter of a beat. And then we do 32nd notes, which are an eighth of the beat. Mostly tomorrow you won't go past 16th notes. So that is the note tree. And the reason we do it in the whole to the half is because most things are in 4/4, so a whole note is a whole measure of 4/4. Easy breezy? Any questions on the note tree? Okay, so here where it gets just a little complicated is when we add dots. Let's say we got a dotted half note. Does anybody know what we do when we dotted note? Half the value, right. So pretty easy for this, we just add 1 beat or a quarter note, so we put them together as 3 beats. So usually the way you'll see this in music is you'll have a dotted half followed by a quarter, so that it completes the 4. Now when we dot the quarter, we're adding an 8th note. And that's why usually after a dotted quarter, you'll see an 8th note to complete the 2 beats. Usually when we add dots, we're not getting too complicated. We're really just trying to complete a beat with an 8th note after it. Then you have a dotted 8th, 16th, which are connected. You'll have the 16th, you'll have a little box here to tell you that's the 16th, a little dot with an 8th. How much space does that add up to? It's just 1 beat. So all we're doing is completing the beat. Dotted 8, dotted 16, well, we go that's 16. You get the idea. That fills up half a beat, if you're curious. But dots tend to throw people off really bad. Probably a really good example of it in music is My Country 'Tis of Thee. My country 'tis of thee. The of thee is the 8th that follows the dot in Subi. Na 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 na. Quarter, 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 dotted, That's usually a good example of it. I always subdivide it in my head, or I subdivide it if I'm singing and I go like, I'm doing the 8 notes. It would be 1, 2, 3, 1 and 2 and 3. It's because it becomes on the end. Those are dots. Does that make sense? It's really hard to make. Okay. That might be all I wanted to say. We were talking about chord before. Let's say we're in C, because that'll just be easy, because no sharps and no flats. And you guys see in choir parts, you see all the parts. Say we end the song, it's on C. Look at your last, well, like I said here, your very last measure, you can see here. So let's say there's C here, there's G in the bass, there's an E in the alto, and there's a G in the soprano. That is what we call root position, which means the root of the chord is a C major chord. The root is in the bass. You can also have a trade piece. And I put C here, and I put G here. That is what we call inversion, which is still a major chord, but instead of the root being in the bass, the root is now up here, and the 5th is in the bass. That is like the second inversion, the 5th is in the bass. If I were to change it and put the E in the bass, so that E here, first inversion. So chords don't always have to have the root in the bass, and they can still be very valid. And they do change the color of the tone a little bit, but that is kind of a quick and dirty version of inversions. Does that make sense? Any questions? Any like music marking questions? Yeah.
It's not a question, but just like the chords, you had the intervals and things. I learned rhythms like 4/16 is huckleberry.
Oh yeah, the word,
And then
yeah.
1/8 2/16 is blueberry. So the way you say the word is how the rhythm goes.
Yeah, that's a great idea. That's what they do. We always teach that the elementary music teachers are going to be. That's how they teach the kids. Huckleberry pie, taco, is 8 notes. Yeah, those are, I wish I knew those off the top of my head. Those are fun little ways to do it. Trinda, do you know any off the top of your head?
I did not learn any of those. So I don't know.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them. And y'all can make them up. You just got to do it by syllable. But you'll know if it's or not. If you ever try to teach them to your kids or something, it's fun to do it that way.
And blueberry apple pie. Apple pie would be 2/16 and 8.
Yep. And then blueberry would be 8 2/16.
Yeah.
That put it up. Yeah, blueberry apple pie. Yeah, and there's one for triplet too. I can't remember now. Well, anything that has 3 syllables, you can make it into a triplet. You guys know what triplets are, right? I showed you remember that in rhythm. Okay, good. Any like marking questions? Anything you see on a score? You're like, what the heck does that mean? Like DIM or the dynamic markings? You'll know what the dynamics mean, right?
Sometimes it's that hard.
Oh, okay.
Well, that's a good idea. Let me spread out new music, very good music. So let me. They're easier. So, for example, this is a very first time learning music. Then, what would you recommend us to take moment of concentrate to the new music?
Okay.
This is our song for
Well, you have
2020.
to pay attention.
Okay, so if you look at the first page, a lot of times, especially things to do in America, instead of writing the Italian terms for the description, we'll use an American term, which is reverently. Reverently is kind of self-explanatory. The CA80, CA is like fancy for approximately. You're going to go to approximately 80 beats a minute. You can all download metronome on your phone if you ever know what 80 beats a minute is. It's kind of a gradual. I would call it andante. Andante usually translates to walking speed. That's about 80. Does anybody know why most musical terms are in Italian? Do you want to learn why? So Giovanni Gabrieli was a composer in the late Renaissance, mid-Renaissance. He was in the Renaissance. And he was the first to write dynamics, and he was in Italy. He was also the first to use brass in church. His church had choir lofts on both sides, and he would have them pointing at each other across the people playing. He wrote a lot of music. It's called intentional choir playing. But you do a choir too. You have the choir stand on both sides and sing out over that way. If you've ever been in a Catholic church, most Catholic churches, the choir is actually up there. That's their normal place. They sing over everyone. So it was really common then to have choirs not on the stage, but in the rafters. Yeah, Gabrieli is the one that came up with most musical markings. That's why they're mostly in Italian. Thank you, Giovanni. When we get to, does anybody know what key we're in?
B flat.
I think B flat. Let's look here. Okay, so it's a little confusing because the accompaniment starts out both hands are in treble. So even though the first it looks like it's a D, it's actually a B flat. So I got B flat F, then I've got C to F. So I'm going to ignore the C as a non-chord tone, and I'm going to say this is a B flat opening chord, especially because the B flat's the whole note and it keeps the whole chord. So we're starting out on the 1, which is pretty normal. So yeah, we start out in B flat. What does the P mean? Yeah, piano. And then when we go to measure 9, we switch to MP, which means mezzo, yeah. What does mezzo mean?
Medium.
Yeah, like medium. Good, yeah, you've got this. Then we get to mezzo forte. We got crescendos. I don't know what crescendos are, I'm sure. What about on page 5, the top? If I just read it out, it's rit idem. Yeah, retard diminuendo. Yeah, retard and diminish. Good. And then everybody knows what a tempo means. Back to speed, right? There you go. There's mezzo forte. There's forte, diminuendo, mezzo forte, mezzo piano, diminuendo, crescendo, crescendo. The UNIS on top of page 8 just means unison. That's where you guys are all going to sing the same thing at once, even though you can be in octaves.
The key change, measure 48.
Oh, thank you. This key change to measure 48. What are we changing to?
C major.
Change it to C. You can really see it in the piano part. It's got a pedal C down here that's going to stick through the whole measure and get rearticulated on 4. And we got C, G, B, C, E. So we're really building a C7 chord there. We can really ignore the B. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm running the wrong clef. C, G, D. We can ignore the D and then just count that as a big O fat C chord. So there's a big O 1 chord right there. But then you can see that the tenors are singing the G. We're doing the G unison there, so we're singing the 5 of C. So the voices are coming on the 5, the piano's playing the 1. That's really common because they sound good together. So yeah, we switched to C there. We're still all in major keys. It's all time. It's okay. We have the chord note triplets there, which is just fit 3 notes into 2 beats. Poco retards, we know what poco means. Little, yeah. Poco is what they usually write. It means little by little. And look at our very last chord. We got the molto retard. Molto means much. There's much retard there. Our last chord that we sing is C, C, C. So we're all singing C's. One thing you will notice here, the men singing the bass part are going to be singing the same pitch, the middle C, as the alto. So you guys are going to match pitch there, and the sopranos are an octave above that. And then our last chord on the piano, we got C, G, E, G, C, G. And we got the D to the E. That's nice little like a little exclamation point at the end. So it's like, here's a nice chord, and then here's like a little color note to make it interesting. Yeah, and then you end on the 3. Yeah.
What's TE?
What measure was it?
68.
Tenuto. It means long. Play everything really long. Good catch. I missed that one. So yeah, those are your basic markings you'll see in a normal choir part. Sometimes there's some composers that refuse to use Italian and they'll write things in their own language. Those can be fun. Those are really fun. And if you play things, there's some German composers that write everything in German, so you have to look up all the words. That's fun too. But mostly, 90% of music is in Italian. Rest. So we got what rest is this quickly?
Good question.
That means you rest for 1 beat. Anyway, you know what rest looks like. It's the little squiggly one. And then the half rest. I don't know why they didn't delineate these a little better. I can ask you one day. The half rest sits on the middle. And that's 2 beats, and then the full rest sits right above it, and that's 4 beats. And usually for me, if I look at a rest, I don't think about how long it is. I I guess I'm gonna have it. I just think of how long the note I had before it was and how much space is left in the measure. Like I don't ever count rest. I think of what beat my next note is on. If that makes sense. I guess that's why I didn't think about rest. But if you're ever curious, there's your different rest. The eighth rest, I don't think I want to try and draw it. It's like, yeah, like that's the middle or something crazy.
I was taught to think of the half a pole rest like a boat. And if the boat's half above the water, the line is the water. If the boat's half above the water, it's a half note. If the boat's all the way below the water, it's a pole.
It's really good. Yeah, that's what we think about it. Especially 8 rests. I usually don't even count rests. I just count in what I need to play. I counted notes. To me, it seems simpler, but everybody's different. You may like counting rests. Good question. Any other questions?
I've got a question. It's very random. And everything is just curiosity. Who came up with the notation? When did the notations for music begin? And was there initially historically was there a consensus, or did it kind of evolve over time?
It evolved over time.
It did.
We had something similar to this in medieval times. They didn't call them what I call them now. They call them brevs. There's a brev was a half note, I think. A semi-brev was a quarter note. Y'all might remember this better than me. And they looked similar. Like they were circles, and they were on a big staff. They were circles that drew through them. That I think that was really common in medieval. You got to remember, in medieval, the only thing that was getting written for was choir. And so, what I was talking about, if we didn't do medieval motets, you wouldn't see any other clefs. They did not generally use the bass clef and the treble clef. They used what we call movable C clef. Because what they would, I'm not really check movable C clef. This might be a better one. The reason they would use movable C clef, but it starts, see, we're going to hit on the middle. That's a less terrible medieval C clef. Wherever they put this clef, where the two lines meet, is middle C. And so based on, if you were singing soprano, your middle C would be lower because you're going to sing above middle C most of the time. They would put your clef down here, your middle C would be here. If you're singing alto, your C might be here. If you're singing bass, your middle C will be here because you're going to be singing all below the C. The reason they did this was to save ink, because ink was very expensive, and so they did not want to draw ledger lines. And so they would put the movable C clef wherever they could put it to only keep everything in the staff, so they wouldn't have to write ledger lines. It was all to save ink. So we had that, and the G clef and the F clef kind of grew out of this clef. Long story short.
It was newfangled at one time.
It was very newfangled at one time. It was all came out of the church. All music stuff we had came out of the church. It was medieval times, right after the Dark Ages, kind of the end of the Dark Ages, when we started having records of what they were doing. And so right around 1400, 1500, when we start having music that we can still have, we can see.
Say that again.
Right around 1400, 1500 is when we start seeing actual music written down. Before that, there was chant, and they just taught it by rote. Gregorian chant mostly, and that was the monks that did that. And they did not usually write it out; they taught it by rote.
So how did harmony start? Was that accidental?
You know,
Somebody
it was.
said, "Oh, that sounded good."
Yeah, it was actually illegal for a while. Everything was what we call monophony, which is monophony. Everything was just, you could only sing unison. And it was the church. Back then, the church made all the laws, so the church was when they made it illegal. And then at some point, someone decided, hey, we should be able to do this. And that was really what in music, the difference between medieval and then the Renaissance. The Renaissance is when we started using polyphony.
What was the rationale of it being illegal? Do you know?
I don't remember. You know, Catholics were kind of nuts back then. And they ruled everything, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And
Maybe it was vainglorious. It brought attention
yeah,
to
it could
yourself.
be. I mean, it came out of the monk, so it could be because it was too vain.
Or too sensual even.
Yeah.
Because
Or
it's
too
pretty.
sensual, yeah.
Sure.
Because it's pretty, yeah. It could be all those things. Yeah, it was illegal to write in polyphony.
Maybe it was tied to, like maybe what the people that were not saved sang. or
Could be.
something. You know, they always kind of.
Yeah. Well, they look very down on what they called secular music. It was called secular music back then. That it didn't have to be like we think of secular music now. We think of like, you know, like things you hear on the radio they shouldn't be listening to. Like secular music then was like a love song. You know, like Brahms' lullaby would be secular then, would be evil to them. Because anything that wasn't church related was evil. So yeah, long story short, that's kind of how we got the monks and then the churches and then polyphony, and then they started writing it out so that the different choir parts could sing it. Any other questions? Thank you guys for listening.
It's
Enjoy the evening out.
great. Could you come back like once a month?